the Thatcher room.
Welcome our witnesses to this afternoon's session. There's rather a lot happening in the House today, so there'll be people coming and going, so forgive the committee. We are interested in detail of what you're saying, and everything you say will be carefully read. But, if we could start by just inviting the four of you to formally introduce yourselves.
Right, well, good afternoon. My name's Dr. Mike Knapton. I'm Associate Medical Director at the British Heart Foundation, so representing heart. And my professional background is as a GP in Cambridge.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Rigg. I'm a transplant surgeon in Nottingham, but today I'm representing Transplant 2013. But I should also say that I'm a non-executive director on NHS blood and transplant, and I chair the kidney transplant clinical reference group within NHS specialised commissioning.
I'm Ed Owen, the Chief Executive of the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, which works on behalf of the 10,000 people with cystic fibrosis in the UK, some of whom will need a transplant, lung transplant, to prolong life.
Hi, my name is Richard Baker. I'm a renal consultant from Leeds, and I'm here representing the British Transplantation Society.
Thanks very much. If I can start off just as a general point, what involvement have each of your organisations had in the development of the government's new strategy taking organ transplanting into to 2020? And secondly, do you feel that your views have been incorporated?
So the BHF responded to the online survey post 2013 organ donation strategy in September 2012, but we've had no further involvement in the process, and we've also fed into the consultation, and we've got a consultation response. And thirdly, we've responded to the NHS BT marketing strategy, which I think is an important component of this report. In terms of whether we've seen our recommendations taken on board, to some extent, I think is the answer. And for us, the omission that we would like to see there is the notion of a soft opt-out, as is being implemented in Wales.
Okay.
So from a Transplant 2013 perspective, again, we contributed to the online survey, but I was also involved in a number of the workshops, and we have a particular interest in trying to raise consent, so a number of our recommendations were incorporated within the document. So I'm happy that what we had suggested has been included in the strategy.
The Cystic Fibrosis Trust has contributed to the work that led up to the strategy. We feel that it is in the right direction. There are some gaps. We particularly feel that there needs, on the lung side, to be a national lung allocation system to ensure that there's a better match between organs donated and those that are required. And there are other areas which are probably shared by colleagues here. So it's a good start, but we think there's a lot more detail that needs to be fleshed out in terms of how it's going to be delivered.
And I think the British Transplantation Society would say the same. We were consulted, and the Chief Executive maintains a dialogue with our President on a regular basis. We were happy with most of the consultation. There's a bit of devil in the detail that needs to be worked out, and there's some funding issues I think we could discuss, but generally we're behind it.
We've got some funding issues and some detailed issues. Are these the kind of weaknesses that you'd see, or are there more fundamental things that you would like to have seen incorporated in this strategy?
Well, from our perspective, the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, we were disappointed that there wasn't a clearer commitment to a national lung allocation system, which is what we think is required on any basis to have a proper national system. So that was, for us, an omission. It's part of a conversation we continue to have with the HSBT. We share the issues around soft opt-out that as colleagues have raised. We also think that there were some useful indications on some of the issues around risk, which are important. So it's, I don't know, what I'd say, 7 out of 10?
I think it's building on an important bit of work. The previous strategy has delivered its 50% increase in the number of organ donors, although obviously that only translates to 33% increase in the number of transplants, so there is still a way to go. I think one of the challenges within the document is that it says that it's to be done within existing funding. And I think there are some challenges as to how you bring about major societal change without any extra funding, and also how you deal with the extra activity, both within organ donation and transplantation without extra funding. I would perhaps take a different view on the opt-out, but I expect we'll come to that later on. But I don't think there are any significant things that have been missed out from my perspective.
Is your point about funding the same, Dr. Baker?
Well, I think Keith knows more about those issues. There was one particular thing about, we had some dialogue with the Cabinet Office about 12 months ago regarding the quite striking results in Scotland of the increasing of the organ donor register by 10% with a big publicity campaign, which is acknowledged in the document. But at that time there was a problem releasing funds, which I gather were there within the Cabinet Office to have a similar programme within the UK, within England. And we know that when people are on the organ donor register, the chance of them donating, 90% of families will say yes, whereas if they're not, 40% will say yes. So there seemed to be a clear link between funding and publicity programmes generating an increase in the organ donation register and generating more donors, but that seems to have been blocked. There doesn't seem to have ever been a campaign. I mean, there's a lot in here about working out the best way to do it. There's a document from the Cabinet Office's own advisory group, I forgot the name of it. Behavioural Insight on ways that you might do it and how the principles about which you might do it. But ultimately, I think it's going to need some sort of funding and publicity campaign, and that's what we'd like to see. And
Dr. Knapton, am I right that the British Heart Foundation chose not to join Transplant 2013, and if so, why?
No, we just weren't asked, so I think it was as simple as that.
Well, that's very clear.
But so more seriously,
is that
we have no reason why we wouldn't want to. Well, the one thing that would trouble us, I think, is the membership of pharmaceutical companies in the organisation, and the BHF is very, very anxious not to be conflicted or be seen to be conflicted when it comes to our relationship with industry. So, and lastly, we think we can contribute to the debate as effectively in as out. So, on those grounds, we stayed. So that's a more serious response to your question.
Stephen.
Thank you. One of the things that we've seen from the statistics is that the family consent for organ donation is low in the UK compared with other countries. And we've got the example of Spain in our pack. Why is that the case?
I think there are lots of factors. I suppose the first thing is when somebody dies in that situation where they can become a deceased donor. It's a very distressing time for the family. And NHSBT, through the specialist nurses in organ donation, record the reason why families say no. I haven't got the precise details with me, but I know that it's arranged, so it will include that the family didn't know what their loved one would have wanted. It may be a cultural issue, maybe a religious issue. It may be that there's too much time that's going to be taken between them making the decision and the organs being removed. So there are a multitude of factors. As my colleague Dr. Baker has already said, that we know that if somebody is on the organ donor register, then over 90% of families will say yes. So obviously, if families know what their loved ones would have wanted, that makes a real difference. Whereas it's probably about sort of 40% where they weren't. So I think it is multifactorial. There is something about translating the views of society in general, where people are very supportive of organ donation and transplantation, but it's how that is actually translated into the reality of being on the organ donor register, talking with families, and actually saying yes when the time comes.
To be fair as well, I think the document's quite sophisticated. I mean, it concedes all these points, doesn't it? It goes through a number of these issues, and it will take quite a number of different initiatives probably to solve this problem. It calls it a societal problem, doesn't it, I think, in the document. And I think the trick is how you achieve the societal change, which I'm sure isn't going to be a very easy thing to do. But
British Heart Foundation is a member of the Dying Matters Coalition, which is part of what was then Mike Richards' end-of-life care strategy for England. And he very clearly put it, we don't talk enough about death. And if we don't talk about it, two things are happening. One is it doesn't get given the policy recognition that it should in terms of how we care for people when they're dying, and that links then into organ donation. And secondly, individuals' wishes, including whether or not organs will be used in the event of their death, don't get aired, and therefore their wishes are not respected. So the Dying Matters Coalition has been around for 5 years and is doing quite a lot to support these conversations and create that societal change which has been referenced already.
Have any of you got any knowledge of how it works in other countries? As I said, we've got Spain as an example in the pack. Do they do things differently to us then?
Well, I think we're now doing some of the things that Spain did. I mean, Spain, whilst it is a different culture, one of the key things that they felt was important was actually having what amounts to a donor transplant coordinator embedded within each hospital. Mm-hmm. And actually, as part of the organ donation task force that we reported in 2008, that was one of the recommendations that was implemented in this country. So for all of the major intensive care units in this country now, there is a specialist nurse in organ donation based in that hospital. So that's no doubt made a big difference. There's also evidence to show that where a specialist nurse in organ donation has been involved in talking to the family members, that consent is far more likely to be given as compared to when they're not involved. So I think it really their role is key, and that's certainly been one of the things that has been expanded over the last 5 years. And there is still work to do, but there has certainly been an improvement as a consequence of that. So that's probably just one thing that transfers from the Spanish model to the English model.
There's another thing, isn't there, about the ITU bed capacity in Spain. There's a lot of pressure on intensive care beds, I think, in the UK. If you work out the number of intensive care beds per million of the population, it's lower, is that right, than Spain? And that can create a problem because there's pressure to get people through and maybe not have the time that you need to make this process happen in a satisfactory manner.
We've got evidence from Norway, which has an opt-out system, as we're recommending, since 1973. They've only got one single transplant centre, so it's all quite centralised. But one of the things they do is have a national training programme for healthcare professionals and national protocols governing donation. So there's a more infrastructure around the importance of the conversation that was being referred to at the end of life. Because in the event of someone's death prior to donation, because I'm sure that the person and the nature of that conversation will have a big impact on whether or not the family either go with the wishes of their loved one or not.
Could you just quickly sort of explain that process? How would the family members be approached in a situation? I'm guessing in ideal you'd be able to do beforehand, but that's not practical, is it?
I mean, I don't think any of us are directly involved, but my understanding is that when a potential donor is identified in, say, an intensive care unit, the clinicians or the nurses who are looking after that patient will contact the specialist nurse in organ donation, who will either be on the unit already or nearby. The timing of the conversation has to be done at an appropriate time. I think more recently it isn't just one conversation, it's a series of conversations. So the specialist nurse in organ donation will be introduced at an earlier stage as a nurse who has a special interest. And then when it becomes apparent that the donor isn't going to survive, and when the necessary tests are done, then it will be ascertained as to whether that individual was on the organ donor register. The specialist nurse in organ donation will then tailor their conversation depending on whether their loved one was on the organ donor register or not. But again, they all have specific training which happens throughout the UK. So I think that again is a model. So they're all taught how to break bad news, how to spend it. So they spend a lot of time with these families talking through things. And so, for example, if the individual was on the organ donor register and the initial response of the family has been to say no, then they will often probe the reasons behind that a bit more. So it isn't necessarily taking no as a first step, and that's certainly one of the things that happens in Spain. So perhaps that's a very high-level description of what happens. Unfortunately, none of us have been in that situation for many years. But hopefully that helps to explain it in a little bit more detail.
The strategy does focus on this, and it has got measures in place to try and increase the donation rate. Do you think those actions are going to be suitable? Are going to result in positive action?
One of the pieces of data that's available is the potential donor audit, which NHS Blood and Transplant run. And therefore, every person who dies in an intensive care unit, the information around their cause of death, whether they've been approached, whether the brainstem death tests have been done, whether the consent is obtained, is all recorded. And that's why we're able to have this detailed data of how many people say yes and how many people say no. So that's the source of that data, and that means that we can determine why people say no, etc.
You said about the ICU. Is it done in A&E as well?
It can be, yes. So, but most commonly in critical care, but it can be in A&E as well.
Okay. And I guess last section is if the donor has given permission beforehand, do you think there should be measures put in place to prevent the consent from being overturned by the family?
It's a very difficult one. The Human Tissue Act states very clearly that the wishes of the deceased in life should take precedent. The corresponding code of practice from the Human Tissue Authority actually says that due care should be taken in conversations with that family. If you have a very distressed family, you can sort of question the reasons behind it, but actually you're not going to say no, and I don't think in that situation, and cause added distress, because actually that may have a negative impact not just upon that family, on that grieving family, but also upon the wider sphere. But it is an area of debate that people are looking at in more detail at the moment.
Okay.
Could I comment on that too? Because I think our contact at the British Heart Foundation, anecdotal rather than evident, is when talking to recipients, the importance of a freely given gift of an organ is very important to them, and that so any sense in which there was some sort of dissent or disagreement or question as to whether the organs were freely given or not, it would have an impact, I think, on recipients too.
Okay. And very finally, just for I know within the strategy it talks about cultural and religious sensitivities, and I know you've mentioned it. Are there any particular religions or cultural groups where you do have specific problems?
Well, the difficult thing is that most of the elders and influential people in these religious groups have come out and said that donation is okay, but it is we do have a problem in that the black, Asian and minority ethnic groups form about 30% or just under 30% of people on the waiting list, but only 5% of the donors, and that is definitely a target area to try and improve. And also their refusal rate, I forgot, but it's relatively high as well, isn't it? And if you speak to, there have been conversations had, not by me, but by others, with imams and elders in the Jewish faith and other groups, and they all agree that it's something that can be done. But there do seem to be problems with, getting it operating in practice. But there are people tackling it.
It's not an issue I claim any great credibility on. I don't know if the colleagues...
Evidence I can draw on is a workshop that we held at the BHF about 2 years ago, where we had an imam, a rabbi, priest, and a member of the Sikh community, and the question came up: what were the religious, either scriptural, rules around donation, either for or against? And they all said that all religions would consider this to be a gift and therefore be part of their religious teaching. So I think the barriers come either from misunderstandings and myths or cultural issues around what happens in the event of someone's death in terms of the timing of the disposal of the dead body and that sort of thing. So there are practical issues, I think, in terms of the timing it takes in terms of taking the body away to retrieve the organs and then the funeral arrangements.
David?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Good afternoon. To me, it's common sense that an opt-out system would significantly increase the number of donated organs. Yet, the 2008 report on the potential impact of moving to an opt-out system, the Organ Donation Task Force stated that it could find no compelling evidence. Do you agree with them, or do you think that my simple vision is correct?
Let me start. I've been quiet for a bit, so I can talk now. The Cystic Fibrosis Trust has long supported soft opt-out, and we made the case back in 2008, and we still make the case today. I think our view is it will increase the number of organs donated. I'll bow to those who've looked in great detail at the evidence to make a view on that. The key point for us as the Cystic Fibrosis Trust is, while we support soft opt-out, and it's right that there's a focus on that, and in terms of increasing the supply of organs donated, we need to also get the system which operates now working more effectively, and so that's really where our focus has been on. But we do support soft opt-out, but I think it's important not to see that as some sort of panacea. It's not.
I think there's quite a split within the transplant professionals, which is who I'm here representing. There's quite a split actually. If you take a vote, people, it's a fairly even split actually between soft opt-out and opt-in. It sounds very good. One of the disappointing things, I think, which Keith knows a lot more about than I do, is the disappointing results where it's actually taken place, that it hasn't actually yielded results. So I think most people in the profession would rather wait. I think the idea of doing it in Wales is actually a very good one, and seeing what happens with the Welsh policy and the Welsh, how they get on with it.
Transplant 2013, because it has a wide constituent basis, hasn't taken a position, because we recognise that there are strong views, and there are those organisations who are very much supportive of it and others who are against. The initial report, I think, did look at it, and their feeling was that there probably wasn't sufficient evidence, although I think it's very difficult to say whether it's purely the change in the law that makes the difference, or whether it's all the other bits that go with it. So in some European countries, it appeared to have increased things greatly. In other countries, such as Chile and Brazil, it actually resulted in a fall in the organ donation rate. So it's complex. There are very strong feelings, and therefore I think it's very careful that we look at it very carefully. So I think Wales, it may be a research project. Let's see the result of that. It takes a lot of money to do this, and we could argue that the money that it would take to do that could equally be used to bring about this societal change, whereby more people say yes under the current legislation. But it is there are strong views, and it does need to be the debate needs to continue.
So I've already said we support the British Heart Foundation a soft opt-out. We think it will increase the number of organs.
Okay, so how do you feel about the task force comments that an opt-out system would distract attention away from essential improvements to systems and infrastructure? It sounds like a spin doctor speaking to me.
Well, I've discussed soft opt-out with the Bishop of Swansea on their Sunday programme, and I thought that far from it enabled us to have a very sensible, I think, discussion about the pros and cons of a soft opt-out, and as a result, the issue of transplantation and making your wishes known to your family became a consequence, if you like, of that conversation. So it was a vehicle by which we could, so far from it distracting, it is one of the ways in which you can raise awareness of soft opt-out. And in terms of cost, if I may, we've done a bit of evidence on that, in terms of would it cost a lot of money to do it, and our reckoning is that even a small increase in the overall number of organ donors would reap considerable financial benefits, probably not to Wales, but to the UK as a whole. We estimate with the associated increases of transplants, even with just one additional donor per year, would have a 10-year return on investment of 8 million, which is because of the cost effectiveness of the transplants versus not transplanting patients and the medical costs and social costs of that.
Okay. Last question on this group. Do you think the government should review its position? I know we talked about Wales. Are you happy with the government's position on presumed consent?
No.
Yes. Yes.
I think we should see what happens in Wales. And then.
I think it's to do with pace change, and so our position is, so the first thing to say is heart transplants are a minority of transplants, only about 130, 140 done. So, however, I find it difficult, given our position, that we think it won't do any harm having a soft opt-out and might do some good, and it's a cost-effective. Why wouldn't you do it? And why not do it now rather than waiting for Wales? Because people are dying on the register as we speak, 3 per day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, in the strategy taking organ transplantation to 2020, the risk-averse behaviour by medical professionals is mentioned as one of the factors preventing donated and retrieved organs from being utilised. Can I just ask each of you if you agree with that as an assessment, and if that is the case, how widespread is this problem, and is the suggested the recommendations in the report on how to fix this problem, do you think they're sufficient? Is there anything that you would add to those solutions?
If I could just speak from a professional point of view rather than as a representative of Transplant 2013, I think there are two aspects of it. I think one is the risk-benefit strategy that needs to look, because in terms of a deceased donor organ, it's a second-hand organ is how it has to be. And whereas once upon a time, most people who were dying who were organ donors were young people dying of head injuries, now increasingly it's more likely to be an older patient dying of a brain hemorrhage or a stroke. So we're dealing with a different donor group, and therefore we have to be sure that we're able to use those in the most effective way. If we didn't take any risks, then a lot more patients would die whilst they're waiting. So we have to look at how we age match the donor and the recipient. We have to consider what the risks are of not having that transplant. We need to be able to discuss those with the patient and with their families, so that there is true consent. And whilst we're doing that, then there is the opportunity to gain a better evidence base of what is successful. So in the last few weeks, there has been a report on the use of organs from donors who have had cancer and what the risks of those are, so that we know that in certain situations it is safe, or the risks actually are very low of using an organ from somebody who's had cancer. But I think it does take a while for everyone to actually get on board with that, and I think we have to rely on some centres to take the risks, and then as the evidence base builds up, that hopefully means that the rest of us who are perhaps a little bit more sceptical can actually see what the evidence is and actually change our practice as a consequence. So I think there are areas where...
Sorry, just to be clear, you're saying that you would be sceptical of how widespread this is as an issue, or
no, I think I recognise that.
Solution?
I think I recognise that it is an issue, that there are. So let's say 5-10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought of using organs from somebody who died of a brain tumour. Whereas now there is evidence to show that actually the risk of transmitting that are extremely low, and therefore it's safe to use that for a higher risk recipient. So things have changed, but what is important is that the clinicians keep up to date with the evidence, so that they don't practice what they were practicing 10 years ago, but they practice what is current now. And so I think there is still work to be done amongst the transplant community, and I address that to myself as much as to my colleagues, that we do need to look at what the evidence is and ensure that our practice is based on that.
I think, if I can come in here, I think it's a very pertinent question. I think that risk is a big issue. I think you see inconsistencies across the UK in terms of particular clinical judgments. Our concern from the Cystic Fibrosis Trust is that you have a situation at the moment that 1 in 3 people with cystic fibrosis on the transplant list, if you can call it a single list, it's not actually a single list, but who are waiting for donated lungs, will die before receiving transplanted organs. Yet we also know, and I'm not making a simplistic read across here. We also know only a quarter or a fifth of all the lungs donated are actually used in transplantation. We're convinced, and we've been speaking to the clinical community and others, we're convinced that there are a significant number of those lungs that are not being used in transplantation, that could be. And that maybe we need to push a little, absolutely based on clear clinical judgments, but we are seeing evidence coming through quite clearly that what I call extended criteria lungs, which is lungs which are would necessarily be perhaps regarded as suboptimal in the normal criteria, can prolong life. And we spend a lot of time speaking to people with cystic fibrosis themselves, because in a sense the people who are really taking risk are the people who are taking the decision to have transplanted lungs. And when I sit down with people and I say, where do you want the balance of risk here? It may not be perfect. These donated lungs that arrive may not be the perfect set of organs, but what's your risk profile? I'll have them. I'll have them because it'll prolong my life. And when you see the risk in the terms of, say, this tragic figure of 1 in 3 people on the list dying, you get a sense of where we're keen for the risk issue to be pushed.
Thank you.
Okay, no, I mean, I'd agree with what Keith said. I mean, one of the you have to acknowledge there is a variation in practice, and I think partly it's because there isn't an evidence base, and we are desperately trying to pull in the evidence on what it is like to use kidneys and other abdominal organs from people who've led high-risk behaviours, been exposed to viruses, had cancer, all those sorts of things. And the other thing is, of course, that anyone who's done that and then had their hands bitten and had a complete disaster, and if you give someone cancer that kills them within 3 months when you're meant to be giving them an organ to prolong their life, it's a pretty horrific experience. So I think that all needs to be collated. The other thing to say, though, I think, which is very good, is that there is a governance framework for this now. There are very public lists published by NHSBT of exactly who's accepting organs, exactly what the rates are. And when there are outliers, the medical director or the head of the specific organ advisory group demands an explanation and says, you know what? So I think the transparency has gone up. Would you agree with that? And people are called to account if they are outliers in these systems. So I think there are mechanisms in place to pull it all together.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not a transplant surgeon, but what I would add to what's already been said is that the decision to transplant by the team is a difficult one as well as for the family. And certainly if the outcome is a 30-day mortality, that team will, it'll be affect their audit figures, but I think it will affect them emotionally as well. They do not wish to see patients die following an intervention of that nature. On the other hand, those teams also want to see more organs donated. So I think the framing of this is a start, but it doesn't reflect, I think, the complexities of risk-averse behaviour. It doesn't capture it for me. So on the one hand, there's the risk-averse behaviour and how that affects the individual in front of the doctor or the surgeon versus all those others he knows about or she knows about who are waiting. And the risk to one and the trade-off with the risks to another is quite a difficult thing to do. And so I think we at the Heart Foundation will be very keen to make sure that there was strong clinical leadership in addressing this issue, because you can have inadvertent or unintended consequences if you don't get it right.
Can I just ask, Dr. Knapton, I was struck when I was looking at the report that it doesn't seem to be this issue with hearts, that hearts, in fact in the year it refers to 12-13, that all hearts that were successfully retrieved were used. Is this is that a one-off for 2012-13, or is this something that Heart Foundation is aware of?
I wasn't aware of that, to be honest. But yes, it's not mentioned in here. I don't know how many hearts are retrieved but not donated, so I'd have to check that. The data, I don't have it in my head, I'm afraid.
Okay, I was just wondering if the reason I was asking that, I was wondering if this had an impact on your members and people, or if it was...
So it's certainly the case that if I think less good hearts are being retrieved because the numbers of young men dying on motorbikes is reduced. That's sort of a cliche of where the donated organs used to come from. So the quality of organs is changing.
Okay.
And it's also changing because the shortage means that clinicians are having to accept suboptimal organs to transplant in order to treat the patient. And so there's lots of tensions in this for both the family and the clinician, and I think that's what doesn't come through here in order to address it properly. And I think we should trust the clinicians and families to work on this, to make sure you get the balance between audit, dealing with the waiting list, dealing with the individual in front of you, to optimise the outcomes.
Okay.
NHS Blood and Transplant do produce graphs for each of the organs to say, out of all the potential donors at the beginning, as to where they fall. And although I can't remember the precise percentage, I think for hearts it's probably about 20% of the potential donors where a heart is able to retrieve. It's above 80% for kidneys, and in between for livers, and probably towards the bottom for lungs as well. So there is still room to improve that, to learn from one another, and I think there is more detail under this that does need to be looked at.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can I just move on to the screening procedures that are used to look at individual retrieved organs, and to ask, in your view, how suitable they are at the moment, and just to see if there's, most of your organisations, are there any concerns that, well, either way, that organs that might transport disease are getting through, or on the other hand, are they too rigorous and we're losing the opportunity to use organs through fear of disease being passed on?
There are erudite bodies in place to sort of help us with this. There's SABTO, I forgot what SABTO stands for, but
It's the Advisory Committee on the Safety of Blood Tissues and Organs.
Okay, so they give us advice about, checking for viruses. So all organs already are checked for all the main viruses and various other things, but I don't think they're particularly restrictive personally. But there have been cases where we've had disasters basically of 3 organs all transmitting effectively a fatal illness. Even within the last couple of years. So, you do have to start with a cautious approach, I think, and then maybe liberalise it. Like, we've become a little bit more liberal, haven't we, about hepatitis. In some countries, they use organs from HIV donors for HIV recipients. We haven't done that in this country yet, but that may be somewhere we can go. These they're not massive numerically, but they're the sorts of things. But we have to be cautious, I think.
Okay. Can I just ask, is this might be beyond your expertise, but is that being considered using donor organs from people living with HIV for? Has it been?
Sorry.
Is it being considered for the UK?
I think it's been considered. It hasn't been done. It's been done a lot in South Africa, as you might imagine, because of the different issues there. But it's something you could consider.
Okay. I think now we have estimated 100,000 people in the UK with HIV, so it might be something that we start to look at. Can I just ask the other witnesses, do any of you have concerns about the current procedures in screening for disease, or are you happy with the current procedures?
We haven't had any concerns raised through our contacts with patients with regards to heart transplantation. Of course, it's a small number of transplants, but I think that the key for me would be any risks either way were discussed as part of the consent procedure with the patient in advance of any intervention. And of course, with people on the waiting list, you've got time to do that properly, so that people understand what risks they might be subjecting themselves to.
Okay, thank you.
And I would just add to that, I think there are donor factors as well as recipient factors, and for somebody who's waiting for a kidney transplant who can be maintained on dialysis, then you may not want to take the same degree of risk whereas somebody who's waiting for a heart, lung or liver where there were no other options. So I think it all has to be taken into account. I think that the screening procedures are adequate. The SABTO guidelines are guidelines, and there are some absolutes within that, but there are others where it says you should discuss this with your recipient, and there may be situations where you would want to do that. One new virus that we've perhaps become more aware of is the West Nile virus, and again SABTO have produced some recent guidelines for that. I don't think we've seen that in this country. They've certainly, in the Sabto guidelines, it talks about a large cohort of blood donors who have been in endemic areas, and there's been no transmission of that. So I think it's a matter of balancing these things, and for the experts to continue to be vigilant.
Okay. Can I just ask you, since you mentioned the West Nile virus, do you think it was the right decision to add that to the illnesses that completely rule someone out from donating?
I think because it can't be treated, and there have certainly been cases in other countries of people, of recipients who have died once they've had it. So I think it is important that we are aware of it, although it hasn't happened in this country as yet. But as people travel more frequently, then it may be something that we are confronted with in the future.
Is there anything else, any other illnesses of that sort that are on the horizon that might be added to that list? Or anything you think should be added to that list?
I'm not sure if it's my area of expertise to say so.
Fair enough. But you're here, so...
Yes.
If I can make a point, which is going to be on the screening issue, is returns to this issue about extended criteria. Certainly the issue of lung transplantation has been governed by international criteria which was set 20, 30 years ago. Now, clinicians are pushing that with this extended criteria lungs. So traditionally, lungs from people over 55 or with a strong smoking history, those organs were not used. Now, it's clear from the research that actually there's no, obviously it has to be based on a clinical judgment about any particular set of organs which are donated, but it's clear that the evidence shows that there's no decrease in life expectancy beyond transplant for you when using extended criteria lungs, which push, if you like, beyond the criteria that was set 20 years ago. So I think but if, of course, part of the problem goes back to this point about inconsistency. It's important that we get the evidence base and make sure it's rolled out properly and consistently across the system. And I think there's one of our concerns is that it is relatively inconsistent at the moment, and that's why it does require the buy-in of the professional community and other organisations working together to make sure there's a more consistent approach in this respect.
Just a follow-on to that, I think looking at the UK strategy, there are 4 strands, but the 2 of the strands are around donor hospitals and the other around recipient centres. And a lot of that is reducing variation, working to best practice. So actually we make the most of the opportunities that we have. So we endeavour to ensure that we have all the donors that we can, and that we are able to transplant all the people that we're able to, and not just to be able to transplant them, but to keep those organs lasting for as long as possible. So I think that there are a number of multiple strands which have been, I suppose, highlighted or headlighted within the strategy, but there does need to be a lot more work done at a local level and at a national level to fully work those out.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Stephen.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. We've already touched on this, which is a little bit, which is about how organs are allocated. And there seems to be different systems depending on the actual organ itself. So there are local, national allocation policies, and a hybrid somewhere in the middle. Do you consider that these policies, as they stand at the moment, bearing in mind that this should all be about patient outcomes, are fair and consistent? Or do you think there is some room for looking at them?
I'll answer that first. I'm probably an outrider, I suspect, in this group. But start from first principle. Is it the case under the existing system that those most in need of organ, our focus is on lungs, obviously, is it the case that the system is ensuring that those most in need get the lungs that become available? No. That is, we're clear that isn't the case because we have it in the end local. We have local systems, in truth. We don't have a national allocation system. It's our strong view that in order to ensure that there is that connection between need, but also, by the way, ensuring that the criteria recognises the long-term worth of a transplant, so that we do look at the rates of survival in particular areas, and cystic fibrosis is one of those areas where actually the survival rates of transplantation is good and high. But how do we move to a system whereby that connection can be made? Our view, it is a national system. We're, as I say, disappointed, as I said in my opening remarks, we're disappointed that the NHSBT didn't commit itself to that. I recognise some of the arguments that you used in response, but there are other systems. There's a system, the US introduced a system of a national allocation based on a scoring system, which balanced the criteria of need as well as the chances of what that transplant would produce for a particular patient. We actually think that there are very strong arguments to moving in that direction, and we call the NHSBT to examine it. They are moving in the right direction, so we're likely to move to a system of urgent, national allocation for urgent cases in lung transplantation. I think that's a start, but it'll only deal with a very small number, and we think there's a strong case now moving to the national system for the whole system.
Speaking up on that, just your specific area of lungs for cystic fibrosis sufferers, why do you think they haven't moved to a national system? If you have identified that this would improve patient outcomes, why not do it?
Well, these issues are complex. It's
well, help us understand.
Part of the argument that NHSBT used, and I've had this discussion, is that you don't want to, because of our focus inevitably is on ensuring that number that I mentioned, 1 in 3, the fact that 1 in 3 people are dying on the waiting list, how can we move this down? And that tends to be the driver, if you like, for moving towards a national system. The argument goes, well, you don't want to come up with unintended consequences, so you move the risk, if you like, towards dealing with reducing the 1 in 3, but you actually start to reduce the length of life that people receive once receiving transplants. Now, I think there are risks. I don't minimise those risks, and of course, this is going to take a lot of work, but we start from that principle, and we don't see there's any other way, ultimately, of getting to that where we want to be, which is that you have a system that matches those most in need, that can most benefit with the lungs that become available, and that's a national system for us.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say with abdominal organs, I think there is an issue about time. We have more time to facilitate, moving things around the country.
Right.
So in kidney, it's probably the most advanced, the national allocation system, particularly for donation after brain death kidneys, which is a full national system. There's obviously it's a scarce resource, so you have to balance between the individual needs of the patient, if you're looking after them, and the utilitarian thing, what's best for the society, and that allocation system has to balance those things. And I personally think, and I think most of the members of the British Transplant Society think it's pretty fair actually, and it is reviewed constantly. For example, children get a lot of points. There are various other groups who might wait longer are given points to help, and that's regularly reviewed. So I think the system's pretty good actually. And we need to move for the other kidneys that are donation after cardiac death. We are moving hopefully to a national system this year sometime, or maybe early next year, but that needs to happen as well, I think.
Okay. Mr. Rigg, you were trying to get in.
No, I was going to say that the same
Oh,
thing,
right.
so I won't, I'll save time and not repeat it.
So I think our position is that the system around allocation, notwithstanding all the trade-offs and difficulties within it, is pretty good. The only additional point I would make is that, as I understand it, NHSBT allocates donated hearts, but the transplant centre, which there's 6 or 7 across the UK, there's 1 in Scotland and the rest are in England, but they select the patient. And so there needs to be a degree of understanding and trust, frankly, between the retrieval team and the donating team to make sure that you're going to get an organ that's satisfactory, really. That trust needs to be protected and built up so that a heart from Devon gets transplanted in Newcastle. The Newcastle team know that the people retrieving the organ in Devon are going to know right.
Okay. So that would be an argument for keeping a system local, because the teams are likely to be geographically more.
I think it needs to be nationally. So the selection of the patient to receive the organ should be the local team, but national. The distribution of the donated organ should be national.
But that requires the recovery team to be working to the same standards,
exactly.
guidelines, whatever, across the whole country.
Because it's not possible.
And you're saying that's not happening at the moment?
No, I think that is happening, but it needs to be carefully protected, and
Yes.
the relationships that exist between the retrieval and donating, the retrieval and transplant teams needs to be protected.
Okay. Sorry.
Sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted you, but just to add that any national system would obviously take into account geography. So for instance, on lungs, where the timing is critical to get the lungs that are donated to the relevant transplant centre, obviously geography is going to play a part in any scoring index, if you like, which creates that system, because there are inevitably practical issues that you've got to concern with, but that would be within a national allocation system.
Okay. So, I mean, would, if you like, in a perfect world, would your overriding desire to be seeing that all organs be donated where practical allocated on a national basis, so that need is met, those most in need receive the organs before anyone else, so it is a more equitable system? Would that be an overriding principle, and then you add the caveats that there is the time constraints and geography and things?
Could I just add in an additional caveat to that, which is, yes, it's about need, but it's also about, we obviously want to ensure that a calculation is made about the longer term outcomes of transplants, so that in a sense the list, the scoring, recognises that certain people benefit from transplants differently from others. And we think that's important, because if you don't have that, then you create some of the perverse outcomes that we talked about before.
I just wanted to clarify that one of the other recommendations of the task force from 2008 was the establishment of a national organ retrieval service. So actually that has been in place. So there are 7 teams around the UK who do all of the retrievals. But because the activity has increased with the 50% increase over the first 5 years, and it's now up to 63%, actually those teams are going out not just from their own area, they're actually going to neighbouring areas, which is partly why the cost is going up, and also to try and ensure that these organs are retrieved in a timely fashion. So there is a robust system whereby those involved are trained to national standard. There are again national retrieval standards. So I think some of those initial thoughts, which you're right, Mike, I mean that there has been concern, are certainly less now than they used to be.
Okay, thank you. So, just a final question, Chairman. So those who would submit that the current system of allocation is unfair, that there is inequities in it, in your view, collectively, although there is room for improvements, you would challenge that, and you don't think it is unfair?
No, I don't.
No, I don't.
But do I think it's deliberately unfair? No. But I think the consequence of the system, having effectively a locally based system, means that the ultimately fair outcome is not achieved. Now, would I go and... If I say it's unfair, I'm implying there's some deliberate intent for that. It's certainly not the case. And it's a system that works on the basis of professionals working very hard in the system.
Yeah.
But it's our strong view that we need to move to a fairer system, which we believe can only be achieved through a national system.
Okay, but the direction of travel, I think you said, is starting to head.
Yeah,
that
but I think, I'm not here. I'm not here for the NHSBT, and the NHSBT has not, and the strategy doesn't commit itself specifically to the creation of a national system for lung allocation. We strongly feel that there should be. That is a issue of continued debate. We will be continue to make the case. We made the case in a report we published, Hope for More, in February. I'm pleased to say that the relevant health minister in a debate in the Commons only a few weeks ago agreed to raise this with a particular advisory group that is advising the NHSBT on its future policy in this area, that a national allocation system should be looked at, and we hope strongly that they will see the sense of that and make recommendations accordingly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
David.
Thanks very much. Do you think it's desirable that there's an age barrier to donation? I understand that infants under 2 months do not donate organs in the UK, unlike in other countries. Is that a satisfactory situation?
I think it's an area that needs to be looked at. Academy of the Medical Royal Colleges came up with the Code of Practice for the Diagnosis and Confirmation of Death, and I think they last reported in 2011. And that age of patients was deliberately excluded from that. I think now is perhaps the time, in light of recent publicity, to revisit that. I think that would result in a small increase in organs, but particularly perhaps for those requiring hearts, but not necessarily for all organs, but hearts and small bowel, for example, would benefit from that age group donating.
So in principle, you would want to retrieve organs from any age if it were possible to do so. And I think the barrier, this was not an issue I was across, so I did a little bit of investigating, and I think there are technical issues about the diagnosis of brainstem death in very young babies and neonates. So I think our position will be, in principle, yes, but I suspect that there will be some technical issues about retrieving organs from, sadly, neonatal deaths, which I'm not in a position to give evidence on today. And I think that is a very specialised area, I would imagine.
The thing I've got is that the Great Ormond Street Hospital has cited national guidelines as a barrier to donation after brain death in infants and neonates. Do you think there are any other barriers to donation in this group?
The absolute contraindications to donation are published on the NHSBT website, and actually there are very few absolute contraindications, and I think that they have been agreed amongst the transplant community, and I think actually probably most of us would not actually go to the extremes of those. So I think there are some absolute contraindications. There are a lot more relative contraindications, some of which we've touched on today. But I think it's open.
Do you include in those contraindications donation after circulatory death in infants and neonates, which I understand does not currently take place?
I think because we're not allowed to do it, it's not included within that.
Well, there are clinicians doing solid organ transplants from that age group, and seeing whether it's whether it can work. There are problems obviously because the organs are very small for adults, etc., etc. But it is an area that people are looking into. There is the problem, as I understand, there is no brain death, is there, in the very young? So it would have to be donation after circulatory death, wouldn't it? So it's actually DCD donors that people are using and seeing whether these organs can be useful. But it's not, and it has been estimated that it could be a useful pool of organs, but it's clearly a very sensitive area, and we need to prove that they can be useful, I think.
Thank you very much.
To finish with, the 2020 strategy was intended to, as I understand it, start last September with a series of operational plans. What's the status of these plans, and what other progress has there been towards implementing the strategy?
I think in terms of results, because I think we're still under the momentum of the previous strategy. As I said earlier, that there was the 50% increase in donors by April of 2013. By April 2014, that was 63% from the baseline year. So there is still, the numbers are increasing. With my NHSBT hat on, and I'm aware that there is a lot of work being done within the different areas to do this. It's clear that not everything can be done in year one. It's a 7-year strategy. I'm not sure that progress has been communicated as effectively within the stakeholders as it perhaps needs to do, and that's perhaps something that I can take back because I think it is important that all of us do know what is happening.
I think we feel we're in a sort of honeymoon. I mean, we've seen what the bold intentions are, but we're waiting for the detail, really.
I think we welcome and have welcomed in the response to the consultation the chapter on measuring success and the targets that have been set. I think that gives us a firm basis to measure progress against. However, implementation of this does have some codependencies on other strategies within the NHS, and I think that doesn't come out. And is that, you want me to stop?
No, I'm just trying to understand what you're all saying. How has the... Are you really saying that nothing has started yet? We're still in the honeymoon, I think was the phrase.
Mr. Chairman, can I just say from our perspective, what's happened? There's an advisory group that's been set up to look at cardiovascular issues, which is looking at various allocation systems. I think our issue is more that the strategy was a good start. It was reflected. I think we want to make sure, and you'll get the point of what I'm going to making, I hope, is that process of now, from the strategy to the implementation, that we certainly as a patient interest group that are properly involved in the process of discussion, which leads to recommendations. So, if I can mention that particular advisory group, we welcome the fact they are introducing lay members of this advisory group, which has been overwhelmingly populated with clinical professionals. We would like to see that widen to ensure that groups like us that can represent patient experience are properly involved. And I hope that, I suspect that's probably something which we'd probably, as all of us, want to see across the piece.
There is a stakeholder group set up particularly with patient groups already as well, just to look at some ideas as to how these societal changes can be brought about, because there's no simple answer to that, because if there was, it would have been done already.
Yeah, so in answer to, I misunderstood the question. I'm not in a position at the moment to say whether anything has or has not been done, because I've not seen the first annual report, as it were. But I've got confidence that things are being done in terms of the conversations that I've had, but I've had no... I cannot present evidence as to what the progress in detail has been made, but I have no concerns that progress is not being made. And of course it's a continuity as well. So what was said by Elizabeth Buggins in 2008 has been largely successful, I think, and I see this as a continuation of that with additional recommendations, particularly around family refusal.
This obviously a very complex subject with enormous both human and scientific challenges associated with it. Of the strategy's recommendations, which would you ask the government to give the highest priority to?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that. We welcome the fact that there's a strong emphasis in the strategy to making the system now work more effectively. So while we accept that the issue, regret the fact that there's not a commitment there to the soft opt-out system in terms of the legislative change, we actually think that the focus of getting the system, as it works now, more effective is the paramount importance. So we welcome that. There are we look forward to a continued and robust further discussion at HBT on the particular issues that we've got a concern about.
I think as far as what the government's challenges are, I think the main thing is how we change the current consent rates of 57% of families saying yes to moving that to 80% saying yes. So that is a societal change, which I think the government has a clear role in. And alongside that, I would sort of say that we do need to find ways of funding this increase in activity, because that can't be done within existing capacity.
So, ducking the question will be to say, actually, not any one of these in and of themselves won't do the job, so you do need to do them all. In terms of the trajectory, I think we've got a very good national system which was put in place following the Elizabeth Buggins report in 2008, and we need to perhaps balance that off now with cultural and societal change in terms of the wish it becomes a cultural norm that the gift of life, the donation of an organ in the event of someone's tragic death, will not only, funnily enough, help the recipient, but certainly in my surgery, families who've donated, it is a consoling thought that the death was not in vain. And I go to the Transplant Games every year. It's been held in Sheffield this year, and the biggest ovation goes to the donor families, either the living donors or the bereaved relatives of, and there was about well, over 1,000, I think. Is it that right? I can't remember. Anyway, a significant number turned up, and it was, if you ever needed a moment to understand why this matters at a human level, and not with done this, that was it, because there were these transplant patients who were living and playing sports as a result of their transplant, and they had an opportunity to say thank you to the donors, and the donors' families, I think, got something back from that, which, as I say, acted as a form of consolation, having lost a loved one to whatever it was.
Thank you. That's a very powerful point on which to finish. So thank you, gentlemen, for your evidence this afternoon. If there are further points that come up after you've read the transcript and considered what other people have put in, if there are additional comments you'd like to make, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much for your attendance.